So, ladies and gentlemen, as I'm sure you are aware, this last Sunday was none other than Super Bowl Sunday. The Super Bowl was in New Orleans. I'm going to talk a little bit about the game in a minute. But what I actually didn't talk about last week on the air was the fact that the weekend before the Super Bowl, which would have been, 2 weekends ago, the weekend before the Super Bowl, myself and my wife, Kate, or the Kate, as many of you know her, we actually went to New Orleans for the weekend to visit some friends. And it was such a great trip. I'd actually never been to New Orleans before in my life. And I have to tell you, folks, if you've never been there, it really is, frankly, one of the coolest and most unique cities that I've ever been to. I actually think it's probably the most unique city in all of the U.S. It is so its own. You know what I mean? It's the architecture is unique, the people are unique, the culture is unique, the music is unique, the food was phenomenal, also very unique. I think, it has its own style of cuisine that's just like delicious as all hell. But here's the deal. So we were there, 2 weekends ago, and because of the timing of the Super Bowl, normally Marti Gras lasts for 2 weeks, but because of the Super Bowl, they actually stretched it out to 3 weeks. And we actually got to see some Marti Gras parades while we were there in the city, which were really, really awesome to see. Now, if you've never, I'm sure you've seen like photos or videos of Marti Gras parades, but if you've never actually been there, the parades that are held are actually put on by local groups that are known as crews. So here's the deal. These crews, some of which have been around for friggin' forever, for a century. Some of them are really, really old. What they do is these local groups, they build the floats, they get the bands, the marching bands, all the people marching in the parade, they get the beads and the toys and stuff that they throw from the floats. So when we were there, we actually saw some traditional Marti Gras parades, which were very, very cool and very neat. However, folks, we went to one parade, one alternative parade, which I have to say is flat out the best parade that I have ever been to. This parade, ladies and gentlemen, was put on by a crew that is known as the Intergalactic Crew of Chewbaccas. That's right, folks. You heard me. Chewbacca's, which you can then make the jump, and you'd be making the correct jump, ladies and gentlemen, that it was a Chewbacca-themed crew and a Chewbacca-themed parade. It was awesome, ladies and gentlemen, and I can tell you straight from a nerd's heart, it was an awesome parade. There wasn't just Wookiees, ladies and gentlemen, and there were Wookiees. I high-fived 2 different Wookiees, ladies and gentlemen. No, there weren't just Wookiees. There were stormtroopers and Hans and Leia's. There was an adorable little toddler in this X-Wing float that was just cute as all hell. There was, I'm not kidding. There was a float demanding the right for C-3PO to marry R2-D2. And who can't get behind droid love? Ladies and gentlemen, who can't get behind that sentiment? But it wasn't just Star Wars. Folks. There was a whole sci-fi themed parade with literally any nerd faction you could think of representing. I mean, normally, Star Trek and Star Wars, they don't, the fans don't always get along, but there were Trekkies there. There were all types of people in Star Trek uniforms. There was Doctor Who. There was Spaceballs, the Mel Brooks, Star Wars, parody movie. But here's the deal, folks. The Grand Marshal of the Chewbacca's Crew Parade was none other than Peter Mayhew. And if you happen to not be a big enough nerd to know who Peter Mayhew is, if you don't know, you better ask someone, but I'll tell you. Peter Mayhew, ladies and gentlemen, is the 7-foot-plus tall actor who played none other than, wait for it, Chewbacca. That's right, the actual Chewbacca was on this giant Millennium Falcon float. It truly was a nerd extravaganza, folks. It was nerdy as all hell and really, really fun. It really was just like a great weekend. It really is a truly remarkable city. If you've never been down there, I highly suggest going down there. It was amazing. The weather was amazing. So that was 2 weekends ago. Let's get back to this previous weekend, the weekend of the Super Bowl. I imagine that you either saw or you heard the fact that the power went out at the Superdome during the third quarter of the Super Bowl. The power went out on half of the stadium for over a half an hour. Apparently, there was a surge of too much electricity at the actual Superdome. And look, I don't want to look too deeply into this, but this is a political talk show, even though I just spent a good amount of time talking about a nerd parade. No, this is a political talk show. I'm not going to be talking about nerd parades anymore. Trust me, we're going to get to the serious stuff. Don't worry. Serious stuff's coming right now. All right, but so as much as some people would like to tell you that sports isn't political, I'm sure if you're smart, you know that that's not the case. We've had Dave Zirin on the show before. Dave Zirin, who's the writer for The Nation, who really does constantly talk about the crossing between sports and politics, and sports is really political. And I have to say, when the blackout happened, I had plenty of thoughts coming through my head. I'm going back to comic books for a second. Like many of my comic book nerd friends, I did think when the power went out that maybe the villain Bane might be responsible for the blackout. I'll admit, I thought maybe Bane was going to come out and say, "People of New Orleans," or something like that. He didn't, but the thought crossed my mind. I also thought I also thought that watching the power go out at this gigantic stadium, my thought was, well, here we have a very gigantic example of America's crumbling infrastructure. A lack of investment in public goods and services. So many of our electrical grids are frankly in dismal shape all over our country. They're in dangerous shape. And clearly, the one at the Superdome would fall under that category, as it was not able to hold power for the biggest sporting event of the year, the one that is an international game that showed all over the planet. The power went out. The friggin' power went out at the Super Bowl. That's something that, again, it's like, do I really care that the power went out at the Super Bowl? Not really, but it's like, that is a big deal, and it's something like, if power can go out at the bloody Super Bowl, that really is some reason for us to actually examine what is the state of our power grid in our country, and frankly, it's bad. I also thought when the power went out, what many people, clearly thought about and tweeted or posted on Facebook, excuse me, and that is how seeing the power go out at the Superdome, it clearly brings back the memories of all of those poor people who were trapped in that very same Superdome after Hurricane Katrina. They were trapped for days without power, without food, without water. I mean, it really did bring back some of those, frankly, just nightmarish images from Hurricane Katrina. And look, obviously, it's not, it's not like poor people just trying to stay alive in the Superdome with no power. I mean, frankly, when the power went out, it was only half the power, and it's rich people in there. It's, the wealthy who obviously can just get in their cars and drive away. But, I think we should remember that this horror happened in that building, in that city, in our country, just would it be 8 years ago when that actually happened? That is not ancient history. That is very recent, when people died in that very building. And, look, as I said, I wasn't the only one who was thinking about that. A lot of people posted about it on Twitter and Facebook. In fact, one person in particular who apparently was brought back to 2005 and had memories flooding back from 2005 and Hurricane Katrina. One person was none other than the former head of FEMA, Michael Brown. That's right, that Michael Brown. Michael, you're doing a heck of a job, Brownie. That's the Michael Brown we're talking about. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Brown, who as head of FEMA during Hurricane Katrina, deserted and left to die hundreds of thousands of American citizens. That he left to die. Left to friggin' die and fend for themselves. Michael Brown decided that the blackout at the Super Bowl would be a good time for him to go to Twitter, to go and post on Twitter. That's what Michael Brown decided to do. He thought it would be a good time for him to show off some of that classic heck of a job Brownie wit, huh? Some of that wit that everybody loves so much about the man responsible for FEMA after Katrina. While the lights were still out at the Superdome, ladies and gentlemen, on Super Bowl Sunday, Michael Brown tweeted, quote, "Someone just told me there was fighting going on in the New Orleans, Louisiana Superdome. Hashtag shocked." Isn't that funny? Isn't that funny, people? Isn't that just hysterical? Making fun of the people that you left there to rot and die? What a sick and twisted human being Michael Brown is. What a friggin' sociopath. Mocking those people. What is wrong with him? After being in charge of FEMA where thousands died, he actually, in that sick, twisted, evil, sociopath brain of his, thought it would be a swell idea, a good idea to go on Twitter and mock those who he left to die. Do you believe that? Oddly enough, folks, Michael Brown this day in our country has apparently a fairly successful radio show. Because that is how the right wing rewards both gross negligence, gross incompetence, gross neglect. You leave victims of a hurricane to die, you get rewarded with jobs in the right-wing media where you can mock those whose lives you hurt and destroyed. Seems fair and just, doesn't it? We'll be right back.